If decluttering advice worked, you wouldn't still be stuck. I want to talk about why knowing it hasn't been enough. If that sounds familiar, subscribe. This is what we talk about here. There are people who have spent years trying to declutter. They've watched enough videos that they know what's coming before the person on the screen even has to say it. And that's what makes being stuck so frustrating. You can know exactly what you should do and still find yourself standing there unable to make the decision. When I worked in hoarded homes and I see the quieter versions of it now in completely ordinary homes, from the outside, clutter looks like a really physical problem. There's too much stuff, so you just remove some. And sometimes it's really that simple. You pick something up and realize, yeah, I'm finished with this, and out it goes. Then you reach something that should be just as easy, but it isn't. And that's where I think the conversation usually gets too shallow. We keep asking what we should do with the object, but sometimes we already know. The harder question is why we can't seem to do it. Working around hoarding changed the way I look at that. At first, the amount of stuff gets your attention. It almost has to. Once you're inside that environment for a while, you start noticing that the amount doesn't really explain why everything stayed. Two things can sit right beside each other and one can leave without much thought. The other one can stop the entire process. They may look equally unnecessary from the outside, but they're not the same decision at all. Once I understood that, ordinary clutter started looking different to me as well. Think about something as simple as a sweater that you haven't worn in years. You already know that the practical answer is okay, it doesn't fit. You're not reaching for it, but still, you put it back in the closet. And that's worth noticing. Not analyzing it, not turning it into a huge emotional event, but just noticing why that one. And maybe that sweater belongs to a time when your body just felt more familiar to you. You didn't go into the closet planning to deal with that today. You just went in to make some room for yourself. And now you're holding something that made your afternoon feel more complicated. The sweater, of course, is still just a sweater, but that decision is no longer about the sweater. And that's where a lot of decluttering advice just doesn't work anymore. The advice can tell you that it doesn't fit. You already knew that. It can't tell you why putting it in a bag feels different than putting another shirt in the same bag. And when people don't understand that difference, they often assume that they're doing something wrong. They tell themselves, this shouldn't be so hard. It's only a sweater. And yes, that's true. It is. The thing isn't always the difficult part. I think that distinction changes a lot. It means you don't need another trick for every moment you hesitate. Sometimes the hesitation is telling you that the decision has moved beyond the practical question. That happens with things that seem to survive every declutter that you do. You know you don't use them. You've picked them up before. You may have moved them to a better storage place. Months later, there they are. I think a lot of people have something like that in their homes. Maybe it's a box. You already know what's inside it. You don't need to open it in order to remember. Every time you see it, you think, I really should deal with that. It's taking up a lot of space. But then you don't, and it moves to another shelf. Maybe it even moves houses. At some point, that box, it isn't really storing belongings anymore, is it? It's storing not yet, not today, not this time. That can go on for years. Nothing terrible happens when the box stays closed, and that's what makes postponing it so easy. But every time you see the box, you meet that same decision all over again. And that's exhausting in a way we don't ever really talk about. And the decision may have very little to do with what's actually inside. Some belongings keep a possibility open for us. There might be something you bought for a life you really thought you were going to live. You still don't use it, yet getting rid of it feels strangely bigger than keeping it. Keeping it doesn't force any conclusion at all. It can sit there for another year while the possibility stays technically open. Removing it can make you finish the thought. There may not have been an obvious moment when something ended. You simply stopped needing what you once needed. Then years pass and the house still looks like the old arrangement is waiting to start again. And that is one of the things I find most interesting about our homes. They don't actually change with us. A life can move on while the belongings stay exactly where they were. Eventually, you can be living one life inside a home that still expects something else completely from you. That's when clutter can start feeling heavier than the actual amount of stuff. You aren't only maintaining what you use, part of your home is still devoted to something that's no longer even happening. And sometimes you don't realize how much energy that takes until you change it. Money can create the same kind of hesitation in a completely different way. You buy something that costs enough to remember. It doesn't become what you thought it would. Years later, you still see the price before you even see the object. I paid good money for that, so it stays. The strange thing is that the money left a long time ago. The object can't bring it back for you. You know that, of course, but removing it can feel like finally admitting the purchase is finished. There will be no future moment when it suddenly turns into a good decision. And that's uncomfortable. So the object gets another year, and another. Not from usefulness, but from unfinished business. Once you see what's happening, you can stop trying to convince yourself that you'll use it someday. The decision gets cleaner. You spent the money, it didn't work out. The object doesn't need to keep reminding you. That's a very different decision from, do I need this? And this is exactly why I think people can know a tremendous amount about decluttering and still feel completely stuck. They keep applying the practical rule to a decision that stopped being practical years ago. There are also belongings where the usefulness was never really the point. Something connected to a person can sit untouched for years and still feel really difficult to make a decision about. And this is where some of the standard advice can sound almost absurd. You haven't used this lately. Of course not. Use has nothing to do with why it's even there. Now you're deciding how much physical evidence you need to keep from something that mattered to your life. That's harder, and it deserves something better than a rule about how long it's been since you used it. I think we can accidentally turn objects into proof. Proof that something happened, proof that someone mattered. Then reducing the amount can feel like reducing the importance. Intellectually, most of us know that isn't true. Emotionally, the object can still feel like it's carrying part of the record. That's one of those places where I think you really have to slow down. Not forever, just enough to understand what you're actually asking yourself to decide. You may still keep the thing, and that's fine. I'm not interested in empty houses for the sake of empty houses. I care whether the decision belongs to the person living there now, and that's different. A conscious yes can settle something that an automatic yes keeps reopening. And I think a lot of people are worn out from reopening the same decisions. They've decluttered the room before, they've handled those same belongings. They've told themselves this time will be different, and then they get to the same place and stop. That can start to feel really personal. Why can't I do this? Why am I back here? Maybe the problem isn't that you never learned how to declutter. Maybe you reached the part where decluttering stopped being the real reason. That's a much more precise place for you to work from. Instead of searching for another method, you pay attention to where the method stops working. And that pause is information. It tells you there is something else inside this decision. Sometimes the answer is obvious the second you let yourself see it. Oh, that's why. And that can be enough. You don't need to turn it into a lesson about your whole life. You just need to stop pretending the practical question is the only question in the room. And once you do, the choice can become surprisingly quiet. You may decide that you actually want to keep it. You may decide that you're finished with it. Either way, you are no longer moving the thing around your home while waiting for some future version of yourself to solve it. Time also changes the way we see things we have owned for a long time. After enough years, an object can stop feeling like a choice. It's just there. You bought it 20 years ago, and somehow the length of that relationship started sounding like a reason that you should just keep it. I've had that for 20 years. Okay, but what does 20 years tell you about what you need right now? Not much. The old decision may have been perfectly good. The thing may have served your life well. That doesn't make that decision permanent. Something can have been right for you then and not belong with you right now. You don't need to make the past wrong in order to change your present. That frees up a lot of things. It also frees you from having to justify every change as though somebody is checking your work. You're allowed to notice that your life doesn't look the way it used to. Your home is allowed to notice too. And this is where the emotional side of decluttering becomes very practical for me. It isn't an extra layer we add to make the conversation deeper. Sometimes it explains the entire problem. If you've spent years learning how to declutter and the same few things keep surviving, I don't think more information is automatically the answer. You may need to look at what those belongings are still doing for you. And that can be a hard question. Not complicated, just hard. There's a difference. You can understand something instantly and still need a minute before you're ready to act on it. I think a lot of people have been trying to rush that minute. They pick something up and they feel that hesitation and then immediately start arguing with themselves. I should be able to do this. And that argument usually makes the whole thing more tense and exhausting. So, what happens if instead you notice the hesitation without trying to beat it? You may realize the object has become connected to an old version of your life that you haven't quite stopped making room for. And this is where the whole video gets down to something much bigger than a closet. A home can become very loyal to a life you no longer live. It keeps the old arrangement long after your days have changed. You can walk through the rooms and barely notice how much space is still being given to something that's over. And then one day you do notice, and that can hit harder than expected. You thought you were cleaning a room. Instead, you have just realized what part of your home has been waiting for a person who isn't coming back in quite the same way. That person might be you, the younger you, the busier you, the you who thought there was more time for a plan that slowly disappeared. And that is where clutter can become very emotional without looking emotional at all. It can look like a shelf, a closet, or a box. Nothing dramatic, but sometimes what you're seeing is a home that hasn't caught up yet. I think that is the deepest part of this for me. We spend so much time asking whether our belongings still have value, but I really think the bigger question sometimes is whether they still have a place in the life that's actually happening. And those are not the same thing. Something can matter and still leave. Something can have a beautiful history without needing permanent square footage. Something can finish its job. That doesn't erase what came before. It just means the story moved, and you moved with it. And that's why decluttering can become such a strange doorway. You start with the stuff, and then somewhere inside the process, you begin noticing your own life. Not in some grand and dramatic way. You just see where the house and the person living inside it have drifted apart. And that's when the practical work can finally start making sense. You aren't getting rid of your past, you're making sure your current life has somewhere to happen. There's a difference. And I think that difference is what a lot of people have been missing when they say they've watched decluttering videos for years and are still stuck. You may already know every practical thing you need to know. The part you haven't been shown is why certain belongings stop behaving like practical decisions. Once you see that, you can stop fighting yourself with rules that were never going to reach the real issue. The next time you pick something up and feel that familiar stop, give it 1 second before you talk yourself into anything. Notice what just happened. The object may look completely ordinary. The reason you keep it may not be. That little piece of clarity can change the whole decision. You finally know what you're actually dealing with. And that is where I think real decluttering often begins. Not when you find a better system, when you understand why the old one could only take you so far. Maybe decluttering isn't only about making room in your house. Sometimes it's about letting your home catch up to your life. If you recognized yourself in this, tell me where. Those conversations are a huge part of this channel. And if this helped, please hype the video. It helps these conversations find more people who may need them. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, you can join Middle Life Friends and Family by clicking the join button below. You'll also get access to our workshop and behind the scenes videos I share there. You can find us on podcast format on Middle Life Adventures Decluttering in Life on Spotify, Apple Music, and Apple Podcasts. My other channel, Coffee with Leslie, is where we have the more relaxed conversations. And Middle Life DIY is where I share the quieter travel content that I also enjoy. I thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.